Hello and welcome to the high-octane, white-knuckle ride that is the We're Not Experts History podcast. So no pressure. My name isn't Sarah, and Sarah's name isn't James, is it?
Last time I checked, it was still Sarah, I think.
Okay, before we begin, I'd just like to say 2 words to our listener. Seat tight. Anyway, Sarah, what are you going to discuss with us today?
Today, and I hope the sleep tight wasn't you implying that I'm going to bore you to sleep, which I probably will, to be fair.
Would I imply that?
Yeah, you
Let's
would.
get on with it.
Okay, so...
The sooner we start, the sooner we can all get on with our lives.
You're all right. Calm down. Okay, so, well, I think you'll like this one because it's quite a gloomy topic. The Great Plague of London. 1665, another plague. So
is everything all right at home?
It's good. Yes, we don't have the plague. We had COVID a couple of weeks ago, which I think I've said that on the last 2 podcasts.
Well, you've hinted at it by coughing.
Yes, which that might happen throughout, and I apologise. I will try and keep the coughs to a minimum, but anyway, the Great Plague of London.
So the Great Plague.
The Great Plague. So this is the Great Plague of 1665. I'm saying the Great Plague of London, it affected the whole country, but in this podcast or this episode, I'm mainly focusing around how it affected London, just to make that clear. But the Great Plague of 1665, it was... Imagine you've watched a really terrible movie and then they release a sequel that you didn't want, that nobody wanted. That is pretty much the Great Plague. So we've had the Black Death of 1348. Had to think about that date. And there is a podcast on that already live. And the Great Plague arrived about 300 odd years later. Pretty much the same plague, the same bacteria. Just in a different time zone.
So it's been dormant for 300 years,
well,
and then it's back.
Well, not necessarily dormant. It has been cropping up here and there, and there have been outbreaks, smaller outbreaks, in various places in Europe, probably in other places as well. But this was just... so it didn't hit as hard as the Black Death, which... wiped out probably at least a third, if not more, maybe closer to half of England's population. This didn't hit as hard, but it still managed to wipe out around 100,000 people in just 18 months in London. So 100,000 people in London in about 18 months. So pretty rough. So that was the Great Plague. End of the podcast. No. Okay, so it all started...
I'm excited. I got my hopes up then. So out of interest, it wipes out 100,000 people in London.
Mm-hmm.
Any idea what the projected population of London was at the time?
Do you know what? No, I don't know. That's terrible, isn't it? I probably should have checked that. It was about, 100,000... I would guess... Wait, what are we talking about? 16... I would say there probably would have been under 500,000 people in London at that time.
So that's still a very sizable chunk.
That is at least a quarter of the population.
Wow. Yeah.
So that just in London alone. So
1 in 4 in 18 months.
Yes, very quickly, very rapid.
Yeah.
So 1664, so this is the year before the plague actually kicked off, a comet was seen. So it's documented that a very bright comet was seen in the sky, and everyone panicked. And they in a way, they were right to panic because they had 18 months of hell coming along. But that kind of kicked everything off. So they've seen this bright comet, and everyone's panicking, and they get this sense of doom. This is what has been recorded, that there was a sense of impending doom, and how right they were. So if we think about London at that time, it was about just under 450 acres, and it was surrounded by a city wall, which was originally built to keep out raiders and maybe some common sense at the same time, because
more than likely, yeah.
It becomes evident when we go into this that common sense wasn't very common. It's still not, to be fair. So I had to have a sip of drink then, because I could feel a cough coming. I haven't got the plague, don't worry. So yes, you've got your 450 odd acre, maybe a little bit smaller, city. You've got your city wall, and the wall had gates dotted around, and they all had, I mean, I'm not going to name every single gate because, number one, I don't know every single gate, but they had names like Ludgate, Newgate, Cripplegate, Forest Gate.
I wonder if Aldgate's one.
Probably. So within the walls, it was just chaos, absolute chaos. Obviously, the population was much smaller then, under 500,000. But it was a much smaller area, and everybody's crammed into a very small space. And the poor neighbourhoods, they're packed, absolutely packed. Hygiene just doesn't exist. There's no toilets, open drains everywhere. Streets are covered in a mix of animal poo, human poo, rubbish, and just random slop that people just throw out the window.
Oh yeah, I know, I've been there.
Yeah, so
visited a few times, yeah.
Bit like Basildon. I'm joking. Sorry, Basildon, that was a joke.
Anyway,
we're allowed to insult Basildon because we live here.
No, you're not. Thank you for listening. This has been the last podcast.
So, the city corporation, they did hire rakers to try and clean up the mess, but the rakers' strategy. Get my teeth in. I'm not even going to try and say that word. Their method was to scoop up the nastiest mess and just launch it over the wall. Problem solved. Except it wasn't really, because it all was just sitting just outside of the wall. So it wasn't really a case of out of sight, out of mind, because you could smell it. So you couldn't really put it out of your mind. And it was very common that people would just walk around with handkerchiefs, or they had little flower bouquets. They were called nosegays, and they would hold them to their faces to keep out the smell.
Now, I suppose anyone who's trying to get into the city has got to walk past all this mess.
Yes, yeah.
So you're not getting away from it.
No, and obviously the city's essentials like coal would show up by barge, but most stuff would have come by road. So the city is just one great big traffic jam. So you've got carts, carriages, horses and pedestrians, and they're all squashed together, all trying to get through the gates. So that would obviously create bottlenecks where everyone's trying to squeeze in through the gates at the same time. If you were rich, you'd have a hackney carriage, or you might get carried around in one of those chairs like royalty.
Yeah.
But if you weren't rich, you just had to hoof it around on foot. So all the while trying to dodge the splash attacks from people emptying their chamber pots out of their houses, because obviously they didn't have toilets. So you'd do your business in a chamber pot and you just fling it out the window, and that was that, as long as it was out of your house. So yes,
I need to leave the room. Oh.
Yeah, not
what a golden age.
No, not good.
Oh.
If that wasn't enough, the air itself is trying to kill you, because you've got smoke everywhere. So you've got it coming out of factories, breweries. You've got about 15,000 homes all burning coal as a source of heat. So trying to breathe was just like a full body workout for your lungs, but not a good workout, not a healthy workout, like bad workout.
Yes.
So
yeah, wow.
That gives you an idea of London in end of 1664. that was London. So very dirty, smelly, very crowded, and basically a breeding ground for any nasty diseases, which we're soon going to find out.
Yeah, obviously, anyone who's a fan of history also knows that a lot of this didn't stop. Even after this, it carried on into the Victorian era.
Yeah, because, and again, we'll get more into it, but even when the plague was happening, a bit like the Black Death, people still didn't have the understanding of how disease was spreading. Yeah. So it didn't, like you say, it didn't really change things until much, much later on. But anyway, we'll come to that. So we're not sure, but the first spark of the plague probably hitched a ride in from the Netherlands, because since 1559, the disease had been popping up on and off in the Netherlands. So evidence suggests that it might have come in on the Dutch trading ships, which were loaded with cotton from Amsterdam. And Amsterdam had recently had quite a nasty run-in with the plague, 1663 to 64. So basically, and there it is, the word, basically. That's just my word. If you listen to the podcast, you'll notice that I say it quite a lot. I'm trying to be conscious not to say it too much this time, but anyway.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah, I'm sure you were. So you've got people, they're waiting for their imported goods, their cotton, and they got a bonus plague with the fabric. So not good shipping. Complain to Amazon. I would have just sent it back.
Probably quite a low rating, I would imagine. 2 stars.
Not even that. Probably a 1 star and a very angry review. But
yeah, but anyway, people who ordered this also got the plague.
Yeah, that's true. So probably couldn't have been. They wouldn't have been in any fit state to leave a review. Let's be honest. So
win-win.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to say something else.
No, it's a win-win for Amazon. Carry on.
Yeah. So the plague likely made its entrance through the docks just out, which were just outside of London and the parish of St Giles, and both these areas were very, very overcrowded and run down, and to the point where even the rats probably didn't like it. So these places, they're packed with poor workers living in ramshackle buildings that look like they'd collapse if you sneezed. So the first potential evidence we've got is there's a few sketchy deaths noted in St Giles in late 1664, and there was another one in early 1665. So they were a little bit sketchy. I'm not sure in what way they were sketchy, but they didn't officially show up as plague cases on the bills of mortality. The bills of mortality was like a 1600s version of health stats, but because they weren't showing up as plague cases, so no one's hit the panic button yet. But in the first,
they're not expecting it.
No,
they're not looking for it.
No.
So they don't think about it.
It's probably one of those things in hindsight they would have looked back and gone, oh, those dudes that died in 1660, that was the plague. Yeah, like that. So within the first few months of 1665, the death toll is quietly creeping up. And by the end of April, only 4 plague deaths have been officially, in inverted commas, I'm saying that, officially recorded, but the total weekly deaths had actually jumped from 290 to 398, so more than 100 weekly deaths extra are occurring all of a sudden. So that kind of indicates that something a bit iffy is going on. But things are about to get a lot worse. But at this stage, the authorities are kind of, it's probably fine. They're not really making the connection, or maybe they are, and they're just a bit like, I don't want to think about it. Let's just pretend it's not happening. So we start to get into summer, weather's heating up, and the plague. So is the plague, and it's starting to settle in now. It's a bit like a house guest that doesn't want to leave. It's starting to kind of make itself at home. So in the first week of May, we've got more deaths popping up. 3 in St Giles, 4 in the nearby parish of St Clement Danes, and there was a few more in places like St Andrew Holborn and St Mary Woolchurch Hall. Try saying that 5 times fast. I'm not going to do that.
I'm surprised you got through it once. Carry on.
I know. I had to practice before we started.
St Mary Woolchurch Hall.
One of these deaths actually happened inside the city walls. So these parishes are kind of just outside of the walls, and then now it's kind of coming in. So the government at this point, they started to realise that, okay, we've got a problem. This isn't just a case of the sniffles. I think we need to start worrying. And they put together a Privy Council committee just to try and figure out how to maybe slow it down. And their grand plan was to close some alehouses, which probably didn't win them any popularity points, and to limit how many people could cram into a single house.
That sounds familiar.
So that was their plan. That was what they did. The Lord Mayor, he also got in on the action, and he demanded that everyone start to clean up the street outside their homes, which in a way it definitely would have helped, because like the Black Death, the plague was being spread by vermin, by rats. So having less muck and filth and waste would have helped with that, would have kept the rats at bay. But the main reason they were doing this clean-up, it wasn't because they were aware of this. They still had this belief that illness was caused by bad smells. So by getting rid of the smelly filth, they were thinking, well, we're getting rid of the bad smells, so it will help. But it still would have helped, even if they were misguided in what they were doing.
Wrong reasoning, but
it definitely wouldn't have done any harm. Yeah. Authorities, they tried to slap on a quarantine as well, so they would have had constables at the gates checking travellers and rounding up anyone that looked a bit suspicious. So probably meant anyone that looked like they hadn't showered in a week, which in plague-ridden London, that was basically everyone.
I'm wondering whether those suspicious persons may have also been what they thought were foreigners, maybe coming from Europe and possibly carrying.
Yeah, that's illness. Also very possible. Yeah.
There's nothing we like more than blaming foreigners for illness.
Oh,
That's
of
why
course.
we have things like German measles and a Spanish flu.
Yeah, put it on someone else.
Yeah.
But so people are starting to get frightened now. The fear is spreading, and there's actually an extract from the diary of Samuel Pepys, and this was on the 30th of April. So this is before it really kicked off as well. And he actually said, great fears of the sickness here in the city, it being said that 2 or 3 houses are already shut up. God preserve us all. So, yeah. Scary stuff.
2 or 3, I suppose. It's a start, isn't it? 2 or 3. It's only 2 or 3, but it's a start.
So, again,
I want to know what the symptoms are. I want to know what I need to look out for.
Well, that's what I was coming to. So, again, you've got the main plague, if you like, is the bubonic plague again. So you start out with the fever and the chills. So you just felt like you were getting roasted from inside out. You got headaches and body aches, a bit like when you've got the flu, but a lot worse. Then, of course, you get the most infamous symptom, the painful swellings, which would occur in the armpits, neck or groin, and they would turn black, or they could turn black. They would ooze pus, and they could grow to the size of an egg or even an apple. So not a good look.
You also couldn't miss it.
No, you couldn't pretend you didn't have the plague. So you also got nausea, vomiting and dizziness. Sometimes you'd get dark blotches and bruising on the skin. And this was caused by internal bleeding under the skin. And in some cases you got and I imagine this in the worst cases where you were pretty much a goner, you'd get delirium and extreme fatigue. So people would start to become confused, exhausted, and in some cases they would fall into a coma-like state and then they would die.
So I've got a few of those.
Yeah.
And that's just because I'm over 40.
Just try not to die live. Well, not that we're live, but try not to die on the podcast, because that would just ruin it for everybody.
I don't know. I think if anyone's listened to the podcast, they'd probably be quite pleased.
Probably, yeah. Not gonna lie. I'm joking. Okay. So once the first symptoms appeared, the disease progressed fast. So most people, if you were going to die of the plague, you would die within 3 to 7 days.
Wow, that's quick. So less than a week. Less
than a week. So if you had the plague and you were still around a week later, you might survive. You stood a good chance of surviving. Obviously, that was the bubonic plague, which was the most commonly known plague. But you also got the pneumonic and septicemic forms of the plague, and these were even more deadly. So pneumonic plague affected the lungs, and that was spread from person to person by coughing or sneezing, and that was a sort of pretty much 100% mortality rate if you got the pneumonic plague. The septicemic plague, that got into the bloodstream, again 100% mortality, and that was, you'd be dead within hours. That was a fast one. Yeah, so that was the worst. Although saying that, in a way, at least you wouldn't be suffering for too long. If it's only going to go one way, you'd rather go out quicker, go out sooner rather than later. Because within hours. Are you
going to end up being thrown over the city wall?
Probably.
Yeah, I suppose you're dead. You're not going to worry.
No, not really. But I mean, we'll come to the whole burial thing. I think we covered that, but anyway. So
you'll have to now.
Yeah. Well, what I was actually going to say was a bit like with the plague pits from the Black Death. You envision a plague pit, you just think that they just heap the bodies in there. But in actual fact, when in the future archaeologists have uncovered burial pits, plague pits, they do actually find that the bodies are laid out in some sort of order. So they weren't just thrown in, they were laid in carefully, placed carefully.
I suppose if they think this is another plague sent by God, they probably also think that by just throwing bodies in a hole, that would annoy him a bit more as well. So
yes.
They probably,
I would have thought,
give him a little bit of dignity.
So they were still very respectful and as much as they could be, given the situation they were in. So by July 1665, the plague's gone into full chaos mode in London. And the rich, they just buggered off. They were like, I'm done, I'm out, and they were gone. Yeah. So King Charles II, his family and his entire royal court, they just packed their bags and they were off. Like the city was on fire, which it would be very soon, but that'll be another episode. Merchants and professionals, they weren't far behind. And yeah, to be honest, as summer kind of progressed, there were only a few people left. Obviously, you've got some clergymen and physicians and apothecaries. They stayed behind to try and help with the overwhelming number of sick and dying.
I think you should explain what an apothecary is.
So they were... I always assume that people know these things. They were kind of like your medieval day chemists. So they would be mixing up remedies and potions. And sometimes they were kind of act as doctors when nobody was looking. But yeah, that was an apothecary. So there was a few of those left knocking about. the poor, they were just as freaked out, but and some of them would have tried to have got out of London, don't get me wrong, but for them, it was harder because it's difficult for them to just leave their rented room and go and live their best plague-free life in the countryside without knowing what was coming. If you're rich, you might have multiple properties dotted around, and I'll just go to my country retreat until this blows over. But when you're poor, you can't just drop everything and leave. So it's difficult, really. Also, as well, to get through the city gates, you needed a certificate of good health, which was signed by the Lord Mayor himself. And these were like Willy Wonka golden tickets. Like, they were really, really hard to get. Pretty much impossible to get. And as the number of plague cases skyrocketed, people in the nearby villages were like, well, no, keep your germs to yourself. You're not coming in. And anyone from London, they were turning them away. So people were escaping the city, getting to the village, couldn't get let into the village. Then they were trying to return to the city, couldn't get back into the city. So they were just left in the countryside trying to survive off whatever they could steal or scavenge. And tragically, a lot of people would have just starved or dehydrated in the country. So they escaped the plague, but they pretty much traded one miserable ending for another, which is really sad.
Yeah.
And that happened a lot.
Yeah, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so that did happen a lot. I guess it's like they're in like a no man's land because they've got out of the city, can't get back in, but can't get anywhere else because, yeah, bit mean. So that was happening. So by the last week of July, we've got over 2,000 people have died. So this has only been kicked off for a couple of months, and already we've got over 2,000 people that have died, and the numbers are just climbing and climbing and climbing. So all the regular burial grounds are overflowing, and the city had to start digging the aforementioned plague pits. And this is when you get the dead cart drivers roaming around the streets shouting the very iconic and very creepy "Bring out your dead," which is actually the title of this podcast episode.
Imaginative.
Yes. So the authorities started to worry a bit that all of this visible death might freak people out, because obviously up until this point everyone's been really chilled, haven't they? So they decided that the bodies could only be collected at night, out of sight, out of mind. But that didn't work because what happened is people weren't waiting until nightfall to pop their clogs. People were dying left, right and centre, and corpses were just getting stacked outside along the walls of houses.
Normal waste bin? Would they go normal waste bin or recycling?
Probably, I would say recycling or food waste. Probably food waste, maybe. I would have thought, yeah. But
you'll compost it, yeah.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. Garden bin, but you have to have a licence for that, which a lot of people probably don't have, so food waste. Anyway, so yeah, people because they didn't have licences for their compost bins, because they didn't want to pay the council an extra £50 a year. But anyway, they were just stacking the bodies up next to the house. So eventually, daytime collection had to resume because, yeah, you just had bodies everywhere, which was grim. So that was not London's finest hour, to be fair. But
probably not their worst, but no.
So obviously there were attempts to stop the plague. They didn't just kind of sit back and go, oh, well, this is happening, nothing we can do. They obviously would have been attempting to stop, but like the Black Death pandemic in 1348, there was still no real understanding. They haven't learned anything really. They don't understand disease. They don't understand how it spreads or how to treat it. Germs, the whole thing about germs, that wouldn't be discovered until I think it was 1890 something.
It was a long time after this, yeah.
Yes, so they started to hire, the city were hiring plague doctors, and the plague doctors were a mix of inexperienced, newly qualified, or even volunteers, because your regular physicians, can't talk.
Doctors.
Regular doctors, they'd all sodded off with the rich. They were like, "Oh, I'm not sticking around for this. I'm going. I'm off."
If they'd lived, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they probably would have just got the hell out before anything happened. So they've all done one. So you're left with it's like evening shift at the night shift at the hospital when all the consultants have gone home and you've just got the juniors and they don't know what they're doing. It's a bit like that. But the most famous thing about plague doctors was the super creepy costume. And when you think of the plague, you think of the plague doctors with the big beaked masks, which they would have stuffed with herbs and flowers and spices, so things like lavender, mint, rose petals. And again, it was this whole thing with smells. They thought that the having a nice smell would block out the bad air, the bad smells, which people thought were causing illness, which didn't work because it was nothing to do with smells, it was germs.
Yeah, but the fact they've got that mask on would have probably helped them to a certain extent.
It would have given them a kind of a buffer, but
yeah.
And it probably would have been safer than not having any covering on your face at all. But yeah, it wouldn't have blocked it completely. They also would have worn like a long coat and gloves, and this would have been made of waxed leather or a similar heavy fabric. And that was designed to cover the whole body and protect the wearer from contact. And the plague mask, so they had the big beaked mask, it would have had like these big glass eye openings, which would have freaked people out, I imagine, and big googly eyes looking at you. But again, it would have protected their eyes, and they would have carried a wooden cane, so that probably would have poked the patients with it, just to, rather than touch them, they would have just poked them just to check they were alive. I mean, they tried to help, but again, with no real understanding of bacteria, viruses, or how the plague was being transmitted, they hadn't figured out the whole fleas on rats thing. Their impact was limited, but they were among the few that stayed behind. So credit where it's due. They could have just fled, but they did stay to try and help. You've got a classic case of blaming the wrong guys. The city corporation decided, it's the cats and dogs that's spreading the plague, and they ordered a mass cull of cats and dogs.
Yeah.
Which, when you think about it, the cats and dogs probably were, and when I say the cat, I'm not talking about people's pets, although I imagine people's pets maybe would have been included. But you would have had a lot of cats and dogs running. You didn't have like the Dogs Trust in those days, so cats and dogs that didn't have owners just would have ran wild in the city. But they probably would have been keeping the rat population down.
Yes, that's
and you start wiping out the cats and the dogs, but not touching the rats, you're going to see an increase in the rat population. So yes, not good. And again, going back to this whole idea that bad air and nasty smells were causing disease, the authorities ordered that in every street bonfires were to be lit to fill the air with smoke. And they even said that people had to keep their hearths, their fires burning in the hearth, sorry, not the hearth, the hearth.
Yeah.
Blazing 24/7. So it turned the city into a great big smoke machine, and they thought that the smoke would purify the air.
Dear.
Yeah, so imagine you've already got the plague.
I mean, it's easy. It's easy
Now you
in
can't
the
breathe.
21st century and realising how bad that is, but
They were doing the best they
didn't know.
could with very limited information. That's the thing.
I think as well, if you've got the plague on your lungs, you've now got to fight this as well.
Yeah, that's going to finish you off a lot quicker. I mean, to be honest, if you got pneumonic plague, you were a goner. This probably would have just sped things up, which, you know, maybe did you a favour, to be fair. But by late autumn, the plague started to chill out a bit. So by February 1666, things had calmed down enough for King Charles II and his royal squad to make their grand return to London. They probably would have given it a bit of a cautious sniff, but yeah, they started to come back. And when the king was back in town, everyone else figured, oh, it's safe to come back. So shops reopened, trade picked up, and London slowly started to act like a city again instead of a haunted house.
I was thinking, I suppose once the population's dropped because other people are dying or they're fleeing, that smell might reduce a little bit because there's less people to create waste.
Yeah, that too, and also the fact that cases naturally would have dropped. That was my chair, by the way, making that noise.
So.
In case the mics picked that up, because it sounded a bit suspicious. But what was I talking about? Oh, plague cases. Naturally, plague cases would have dropped significantly because, like the Black Death, once people are getting killed off and there's a lot less people left, there's less people to infect. So,
and the immune systems are getting used to it as well.
Yes, exactly. A bit like COVID. Yeah, I mean, even for people that didn't have the jab, naturally you would build up an immunity to it, and I guess as well you'd find that if you caught it. I mean, I've had COVID twice. Sorry, sure. That I know of. Really? That I know of. Obviously, I may have had it, but the first time I had it, I knew I had it. I was very, very unwell. Not as unwell as some. But the second time I had it, I just felt like I had flu. Just felt really fluey. So anyway, and again, it was the same thing. It was just obviously I must have built up a little bit of resistance to it, and so I imagine it was a similar thing.
Yeah.
I mean, we won't go into this now because this is a subject for another podcast. But by sort of the middle of 1666, the plague had pretty much fizzled out. But then we had the Great Fire of London in September, which people say probably would have killed off whatever was left of the plague. So it kind of, it was kind of like a fiery reset for the city. Plague's out, flames are in, kind of thing. But again, we will talk about that on another episode because that's a subject in itself, the Great Fire of London. It's one that I need to research. But that was pretty much the plague. But as a footnote, one thing I wanted to bring up, and I think you're aware of this story as well. But
it should be because it was me that told you about it.
It was you that told me about it. Yes. Well, you reminded me about it. I already knew about it, but anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I knew everything. But no, what it was. So obviously, I've focused mainly on the London aspect of the plague, but the plague wasn't just confined to London. It spread, and it was countrywide, and there was a village called Eyam in the Peak District in Derbyshire, and they actually made a very selfless decision to isolate the entire village in an attempt to contain the plague. So what happened is in the summer of 1665, the bubonic plague actually made its way to Eyam, and possibly it would have come or very likely, it came from a bale of cloth that was delivered from the city. So you've got London's already got the plague going on. The cloth has arrived from London, and the tailor, I believe it was his assistant that opened it, he got sick. Then the whole house got completely wiped out, including the tailor himself. Then the nearest neighbours, they also got the plague, and it was very quickly apparent that we have a problem here. So the rector at the time, it was a Reverend William Mopperson, and his predecessor, they decided to quarantine themselves, which was pretty much unheard of back then. And what they did, they literally said the whole village, the entire village was on a lockdown, so nobody was to leave or enter the village, and people from surrounding villages would drop off supplies at a spot called the Boundary Stone, and the Boundary Stone is still there today. You can actually go and see it just outside of the village, and it had little holes kind of in the stone, and villagers would leave goods like food and medicine and whatever else was needed, and to pay for the goods, the villagers would leave coins in vinegar in the holes to disinfect them. So it's quite genius, really, because they obviously had some concept of spreading disease to think of disinfecting things, if that makes sense. But anyway, so that's what they did. So they would have left these little coins in holes in vinegar, and that was basically how they got away with not leaving the village. So thanks to their sacrifice, the plague didn't actually spread beyond Iam. But unfortunately, nearly a third of the village died as a consequence of this sacrifice. But then if they hadn't have made that sacrifice, who knows? They may have, it could have spread outwards, and there could have been a lot more impact. So it was a very selfless thing that they did. And are you still there? Because you've gone very quiet.
Sorry, I wasn't asleep. I was just resting my eyes. What's happening?
Fair enough. Well, you just missed the whole thing about the village of Iam, which you told me about in the first place, even though I already knew about.
I told you about it. I'd already heard it. Yeah.
Fair enough. But so here's a twist. In Iam, and this may have been the case in other places as well, I don't know, but not everyone that came into contact with the plague got sick, and it turned out that some villagers had a rare chromosome mutation that gave them natural immunity. So it's a bit like how some people, I mean, excuse me, I don't know if you remember, at school, you probably will remember, when they used to do the TB test, you know, where they the 6 needles to see if you were immune.
BCG or something it's called, isn't it? Yeah.
See, I was actually immune to TB. So I didn't have to have my TB jab. And I've never had to have it because I've always had a natural immunity to TB, which is quite weird. And it freaked my mum out big time, because I remember my dad explaining to her that, oh, maybe Sarah's come into contact with it at some point, and that's why she's immune to it. And my mum was like, what? But yeah, so it's a bit like that. So maybe I've got a chromosome mutation, which is why I'm immune to TB.
Yeah, I can believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely got some kind of mutation going on, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
You know. But that genetic quirk, it actually still exists in some of their descendants, because there are still descendants living in Iam today that have that same mutation. So if we get another outbreak of the bubonic plague, those people are going to be fine. So, you know.
Yeah, I love it. A few hundred years later, and there's still descendants still haven't left that village. Maybe someone should tell them the plague's over.
That, and I was going to say, you can talk, Mr. 12th generation Basildon.
Well, at least
someone should tell
miles down the road.
Your family that there is a place outside of Basildon?
Well, mine are from Wickford. I'm 4 miles down the road, so we have got that far.
It's still the borough. You still live in the borough. Anyway, so what's actually interesting is, and again, I don't know if this is just hearsay or if it's true, but the story is so powerful. It's believed to have inspired the nursery rhyme "Ring a Ring of Roses," which I'm not going to sing because nobody needs to hear that. But
we'll be thankful for small mercies.
Yes. So the ring apparently refers to the telltale rash, and a tissue we all fall down symbolises how quickly the disease struck. So it's quite creepy actually, because I remember as a child singing and dancing around to Ring a Ring of Roses, and you think it's just an innocent nursery rhyme, but it's actually got a bit of a creepy backstory to it. I don't know if it's true,
behind that,
but I think the same can be said for a lot of nursery rhymes, to be fair.
Yes.
Which, that could be another episode. Leave that one with me. I'm doing that one. I'm doing that one. I'm writing that down as we speak, because that is a good one.
Do it.
Nursery rhymes.
I've just written down that from now on I will be known as Mr. Basildon.
Yeah, to be fair, you should be. Mr. Basildon Borough.
Yeah, I'll cover that.
Yeah. But that's...
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not having it double-barrelled.
Okay, fine. Just Mr. Basildon, then it's fine. Right, nursery rhymes. I'm going to see this later and be like, I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that was the Great Plague of 1665. You're welcome.
And 1666, yeah.
It started in 1665. That's what I was getting at.
Well, I thought it started in 1664.
No, the comet, well, if we want to get nitty-gritty, it might have done, if those sketchy deaths are definitely
Well, actually, if we're going nitty-gritty, it started in the 1300s.
All right, then. Let's end it there. But yeah.
That
was the plague, everybody. Thank you for listening. Sorry, I'm stealing your line.
For anyone who's... Yeah. So, anyone who was playing basically bingo, whoever got number 2 this week won. And... my name is Mr. Basildon. Thank you for listening. Please remember, we're not experts, which I think is quite clear by now. We are just two. We're just two history fans. I'm going to say stumbling our way through. It's a subject we love and we like to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much.